Unless we conclude Yahweh, the so-called God of the Bible, was an earthling, then he could only be an extraterrestrial, meaning not of this earth. And the numerous parallels between biblical accounts and the encounters with the Anunnaki by other ancient peoples naturally leads us to consider the possibility that Yahweh was actually an Anunnaki. There exists no scholarly dispute nowadays that the biblical creation narrative with which the book of Genesis begins draws heavily upon the Mesopotamian epic of creation known as the Enuma Elish. It is quite clear that the biblical Eden is a representation of the Sumerian Eden. The story of the deluge, Noah and the Ark, is undeniably influenced by the Akkadian Atrahasis texts and the earlier Sumerian deluge tale in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The use of the plural us in the creation of the Adam sections mirrors the Sumerian and Akkadian accounts of the deliberations among the leaders of the Anunnaki that resulted in the genetic manipulation responsible for the emergence of Homo sapiens. Enki, the chief scientist in Mesopotamian texts, proposed genetic engineering to create the earthling as a primitive worker. It is possible that Enki is the figure quoted in the Bible as saying, "Let us make the Adam in our likeness and after our image." Enki was also known as Nu Dim Mud, meaning he who fashions, and was called Ta by the Egyptians, which means the developer, or he who fashions things. The biblical prophets referred to Yahweh as the fashioner of the Adam. Enki's emblem, the entwined serpents, symbolized the double helix DNA, the genetic code that allowed Enki to carry out the genetic mixing that led to the creation of the Adam. The story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, which is considered the second genetic manipulation, attributes the serpent with the role of leading them to gain knowledge, particularly in terms of sexual procreation. In Hebrew, the term for serpent is Nahash, which is derived from the same root as the Hebrew word for copper, Nehoshet. Moses created a copper serpent, known as Nahash Nehoshet, to halt an epidemic among the Israelites during the Exodus. This copper serpent, also referred to as Nehushtan by the people, was kept in the Temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem for around 7 centuries until the time of King Hezekiah. The transformation of Moses' shepherd's crook into a magical staff, which was first used to turn into a serpent, raises questions about the connection between Yahweh and Enki. The most evident connection between the Mesopotamian and biblical stories can be seen in the tale of the deluge. In the Mesopotamian versions, it is Enki who takes the initiative to warn his loyal follower Ziusudra, also known as Utnapishtim, about the impending disaster. Enki instructs him to construct a waterproof ark, provides him with its specifications and dimensions, and orders him to preserve the seed of animal life. In the Bible, all of these actions are attributed to Yahweh. The argument for identifying Yahweh with Enki can be reinforced by examining the references to Enki's territories. After the earth was divided between Enlil and Enki, Enki was given dominion over Africa. This included the Apsu, the region known for gold mining, where Enki had his main residence. The term Apsu corresponds to the biblical term Apse Eretz, which is commonly translated to mean the ends of the earth, or the land at the edge of the continent. In the Bible, this distant place, Apse Eretz, is where Yahweh shall judge, according to 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 10, and where he shall rule when Israel is restored, according to Micah chapter 5, verse 3. Therefore, Yahweh has been equated with Enki in his role as the ruler of the Apsu. The comparison between Enki and Yahweh becomes even more pronounced when we come across a passage in the book of Proverbs that highlights the unmatched greatness of Yahweh through the use of rhetorical questions. Who hath ascended up to heaven, and descended too? Who hath cupped the wind in his hands, and hound the waters as in a cloak? Who hath established the Apse Eretz? What is his name, and what is his son's name, if thou can tell? Based on Mesopotamian sources, Enki allocated the African continent to his sons, with the Apsu being granted to Nergal. The polytheistic interpretation, questioning the ruler of the Apsu and his son, likely stems from an unintentional inclusion of a passage from the original Sumerian texts. This same interpretation can be seen in the use of us in phrases like, "Let us make the Adam," and "Let us come down" in the Tower of Babel story. In Proverbs chapter 30 verse 4, the term Yahweh is clearly substituted for Enki. Upon close examination of the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, it becomes apparent that the Nahash, which is Enki's serpent form as the possessor of biological knowledge, is the one responsible for Adam and Eve gaining the knowing of sexuality that allows them to procreate. However, the Nahash is not Yahweh, but rather an adversary of Yahweh, similar to how Enki was an adversary of Enlil. In the Sumerian texts, it was Enlil who compelled Enki to transfer some of the newly created primitive workers, designed to work in the gold mines of the Apsu, to the Eden in Mesopotamia, for agricultural and pastoral activities. In the Bible, it is Yahweh who took the Adam and placed him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and to maintain it. It is Yahweh, not the serpent, who is portrayed as the ruler of Eden, communicating with Adam and Eve, discovering their actions and banishing them. Throughout all of this, the Bible associates Yahweh not with Enki, but with Enlil. Indeed, within the tale of the deluge, the identification of Yahweh with Enki is most evident, yet confusion arises. The roles are interchanged, with Yahweh taking on the role of Enlil, Enki's rival. In the original Mesopotamian texts, it is Enlil who expresses dissatisfaction with humanity, seeks its destruction through the impending calamity, and makes the other Anunnaki leaders swear to keep it a secret from mankind. However, in the biblical version, Genesis chapter 6, it is Yahweh who expresses discontent with humanity and decides to eradicate it from the earth. As the tale concludes, with Ziusudra, also known as Utnapishtim, offering sacrifices on Mount Ararat, it is Enlil who is enticed by the aroma of roasting meat, eventually agreeing to spare humanity, forgive Enki, and bless Ziusudra and his wife. Conversely, in Genesis, Noah builds an altar to Yahweh and sacrifices animals upon it, with Yahweh being the one who smelled the pleasant aroma. An argument can be strongly presented in favor of such an identification. If there was a first among equals in relation to the two half-brothers, sons of Anu, the first one was Enlil. Despite the fact that Enki was the first to come to earth, it was Enlil, Lord of the Command, who assumed the role of chief of the Anunnaki on earth. This situation aligns with the statement in Psalms chapter 97 verse 9. For thou, O Yahweh, art supreme over the whole earth. Most supreme art thou over all the Elohim. The elevation of Enlil to this status is detailed in the Atrahasis epic in the opening verses, before the rebellion of the gold-mining Anunnaki. Anu, their father, was the ruler. Their commander was the hero Enlil. Their warrior was Ninurta. Their provider was Marduk. They all clasped hands together, cast lots, and divided. Anu ascended to heaven. The earth to Enlil was made subject. The bounded realm of the sea to princely Enki they had given. After Anu had gone up to heaven, Enki went down to the Apsu. After Anu, the ruler of Nibiru, returned to his home planet following a visit to Earth, it was Enlil who took charge of convening and leading the council of the great Anunnaki, whenever important decisions needed to be made. During critical junctures, such as the decision to create the atom, the division of Earth into 4 regions, the establishment of kingship to serve as a mediator between the Anunnaki deities and humanity, and times of conflict among the Anunnaki themselves, which sometimes escalated into wars and even the use of nuclear weapons. The Anunnaki who determine destinies gathered to exchange their opinions. The proceedings were usually conducted in an orderly manner, with Enlil giving each council member an opportunity to express their views, except for instances when disagreements became intense and led to shouting matches. The Bible, a monotheistic text, occasionally portrays Yahweh as presiding over a council of lesser deities known as B'nai Elim, or sons of gods. In the book of Job, the story of a righteous man's suffering begins with Satan suggesting a test of faith to God, with the sons of the Elohim presenting themselves before Yahweh. Psalms chapter 82 verse 1 describes how the Lord stands among the gods to judge, while Psalms chapter 29 verse 1 calls on the sons of gods to give glory and might to Yahweh, bowing before His holiness. This concept of divine hierarchy, where even the sons of gods bow to the Lord, is reminiscent of the Sumerian depiction of Enlil as the commander-in-chief, with the Anunnaki and Igigi humbly submitting to his authority. Enki, the creator of humanity, was known for being more lenient and understanding towards both gods and mortals. On the other hand, Enlil was much stricter and had a law and order approach, showing no hesitation in delivering punishments when necessary. He disapproved of the intermarriage between Nephilim and human women and was willing to see humanity perish during the deluge when their behavior became too wicked. Even with his own children, such as his son Nannar, Enlil was harsh and uncompromising, as seen when he lamented the impending destruction of his city, Ur. Enlil's response was firm. Ur was indeed granted kingship, but an everlasting reign it was not granted. Enlil's character exhibited another facet, one that was truly rewarding. As the people diligently carried out their duties, displaying honesty and reverence towards the gods, Enlil, in turn, ensured the welfare and prosperity of both the land and its inhabitants. The Sumerians affectionately referred to him as Father Enlil and Shepherd of the teeming multitudes. A hymn praising Enlil, the all-beneficent, emphasized that without him, no cities or settlements would be established, no livestock shelters or sheepfolds would be constructed, and no rulers or high priests would emerge. This hymn also highlighted Enlil's crucial role in approving the selection of kings and overseeing the lineage of the priesthood, which extended from the sacred precinct of Nippur, the cult center. Enlil exhibits two specific traits, strictness and punishment for transgressions, as well as benevolence and protection when warranted, that are akin to the depiction of Yahweh in the Bible. It was Yahweh who determined the appointment of priests and set forth the guidelines for kingship in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16, clearly indicating that he would be the one to choose the king, just as was the situation centuries after the Exodus, commencing with the selection of Saul and David. In all these respects, Yahweh and Enlil resembled each other. Quote, significant, too, for such a comparison was the importance of the numbers 7 and 50. They are not physiologically obvious numbers. We do not have 7 fingers on a hand. Nor does their combination fit natural phenomena. 7 times 50 is 350, not the 365.25 days of a solar year. The week of 7 days approximates the length of a lunar month, about 28.5 days, when multiplied by 4. But where does the 4 come from? Yet the Bible introduced the count of 7 and the sanctity of the 7th day as the sacred Sabbath from the very beginning of divine activity. The accusation of Cain was to last through 7 times 7 generations. Jericho was to be circled 7 times so that its walls would fall down. Many of the priestly rites were required to be repeated 7 times, or to last 7 days. Of a more lasting commandment, the New Year festival was deliberately shifted from the first month Nisan to the seventh month Tishrei, and the principal holidays were to last 7 days. The number 50 was the principal numerical feature in the construction and equipping of the Ark of the Covenant and the Tabernacle, and an important element in the future temple envisioned by Ezekiel. It was a calendrical count of days in priestly rites. Abraham persuaded the Lord to spare Sodom if 50 just men would be found there. More important, a major social and economic concept of a Jubilee year in which slaves would be set free, real property would revert to its sellers, and so on, was instituted. It was to be the 50th year. "Ye shall hallow the 50th year and proclaim freedom throughout the land," was the commandment in Leviticus chapter 25. End quote. Mesopotamia associated both numbers, 7 and 50, with Enlil. He was known as the God who is 7 because, as the highest-ranking Anunnaki leader on Earth, he was in command of the planet, which was the 7th planet. In the numerical hierarchy of the Anunnaki, Enlil held the numerical rank of 50, while Anu held the highest numeral 60, and Enki's numerical rank was 40. When Marduk took over the supremacy on Earth circa 2000 BC, one of the measures taken to signify his ascendancy was to grant him 50 names, signifying his assumption of the rank of 50. Quote, "The similarities between Yahweh and Enlil extend to other aspects. Though he might have been depicted on cylinder seals, which is not certain, since the representation might have been of his son Ninurta, he was by and large an unseen god, ensconced in the innermost chambers of his ziggurat, or altogether away from Sumer. In a telltale passage in the hymn to Enlil, the all-beneficent, it is thus said of him, when in his awesomeness he decrees the fates, no god dares look at him. Only to his exalted emissary, Nusku, the command, the word that is in his heart, does he make known." End quote. While the viewer may have just considered the reasons for equating Yahweh with Enlil, it is important to now present evidence that suggests otherwise. One of the most significant biblical titles for Yahweh is El Shaddai. Its etymology remains uncertain, but it has taken on an air of mystery over time and has been associated with Kabbalistic mysticism. Early Greek and Latin translations of the Hebrew Bible translated Shaddai as omnipotent, leading to the King James translation of El Shaddai as God Almighty in stories involving the patriarchs, such as in Genesis chapter 17, verse 1. Recent studies of Akkadian suggest that the Hebrew term is linked to Shadu, meaning mountain in Akkadian, indicating that El Shaddai could simply mean God of mountains. This interpretation is supported by an incident in 1 Kings chapter 20, where the Arameans recognized the Israelites' strength in mountainous terrain. Enlil, on the other hand, could not have been associated with mountains, as Mesopotamia, his domain, is a region of plains. The mountains in Enlil's realm were located in Asia Minor, associated with his son Adad, whose Sumerian name was Ishkur. Scholars often discuss Adad, known as Teshub to the Hittites, as a deity associated with storms, depicted with lightning, thunder, and wind, and revered as the god of rains. Similar attributes were attributed to Yahweh in the Bible. Jeremiah, chapter 10, verse 13, described Yahweh's voice as causing rumbling waters in the skies, storms from the ends of the earth, lightning with rain, and winds from various sources. The Psalms, chapter 135, verse 7, the Book of Job, and other prophets also emphasized Yahweh's role as the giver or withholder of rains, a role first revealed to the children of Israel during the Exodus. While these similarities may suggest a connection between Yahweh and Enlil, it is important not to assume that Yahweh was simply a mirror image of Hadad. The Bible acknowledges Hadad, as spelled in Hebrew, as one of the other gods of foreign nations, not of Israel, and mentions kings and princes in neighboring capitals who were known as Ben-Hadad, son of Adad. In Palmyra, Tadmor in the Bible, Adad was referred to as Baal Shamin, Lord of Heaven, leading the prophets to view him as one of the Baal gods of neighboring nations, considered abominations in the eyes of Yahweh. Therefore, it is clear that Yahweh and Adad were not one and the same. The distinction between Yahweh and Enlil is further emphasized by another significant aspect of Yahweh, that of being a warrior. Isaiah, chapter 42, verse 13, describes Yahweh as going forth like a warrior, stirring up his rage like a hero, roaring and prevailing over his enemies. This sentiment is echoed in the Song of Miriam, which proclaims, "A warrior is Yahweh." Numbers chapter 15. Throughout the Bible, Yahweh is referred to as the Lord of Hosts, with Isaiah chapter 13 verse 4 declaring, "Yahweh, the Lord of Hosts, commands a warring army." Additionally, Numbers chapter 21 verse 14 mentions a book of the wars of Yahweh, documenting divine wars. In contrast, there is no evidence in Mesopotamian records to suggest a similar warrior image for Enlil. The title of warrior par excellence belonged to his son Ninurta, who engaged in various battles and was praised in hymns as Ninurta, foremost son, possessor of divine powers, hero who carries the divine brilliant weapon. His exploits were chronicled in an epic text known as the Book of the Feats and Exploits of Ninurta. Ninurta, the foremost son and heir apparent of Enlil, held the same numerical rank of 50 as Enlil himself. This made him equally qualified to decree the 50-year Jubilee and other 50-related aspects mentioned in the Bible. Known for possessing a divine black bird used for combat and humanitarian missions, some believe it could have been the same flying vehicle owned by Yahweh, known as the Kabod. Ninurta was active in the Zagros Mountains to the east of Mesopotamia, particularly in the lands of Elam, where he was revered as Ninshushinak, the lord of Shushan city, the Elamite capital. His great diking works in the Zagros Mountains and the diversion of mountain rain channels in the Sinai Peninsula to make it cultivable for his mother, Ninharsag, solidified his reputation as the god of mountains. His connection to the Sinai Peninsula, especially through the irrigation system he established, is still remembered today. The largest wadi in the peninsula is named Wadi El Arish, after the Urash, the plowman, a nickname of Ninurta. This association with the Sinai Peninsula and his mother's presence there also hints at a possible identification with Yahweh. Another intriguing aspect of Ninurta that suggests a resemblance to the biblical Lord is revealed in an inscription by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who once invaded Elam. In this inscription, the king referred to Ninurta as the enigmatic god who resides in a hidden place where his divine nature remains unseen. Despite being described as an unseen god, Ninurta was not depicted as a deity in hiding by the earlier Sumerians, as evidenced by the numerous graphic representations of him. Furthermore, a significant ancient text contradicts the notion of Ninurta being Yahweh, indicating that they were not one and the same. One of the most significant actions attributed to Yahweh in the Bible, with long-lasting consequences and unforgettable memories, was the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. This event was documented in Mesopotamian texts, allowing for a comparison of the gods involved. In the biblical account, Sodom, where Abram's nephew and his family resided, and Gomorrah, cities located in the lush plains south of the Dead Sea, were deemed sinful. Yahweh descends and, accompanied by two angels, visits Abram and his wife Sarai at their camp near Hebron. After predicting that the elderly couple would have a son, Yahweh sends the two angels to Sodom to assess the extent of the city's transgressions. Yahweh then informs Abram that if the sins are confirmed, the cities and their inhabitants will be destroyed. Abram implores Yahweh to show mercy on Sodom if 50 righteous individuals are discovered there, and Yahweh consents after Abram negotiates the number down to 10 before leaving. The angels, after confirming the wickedness of the cities, caution Lot to flee with his family. Lot requests permission to flee to the mountains, and they grant him a reprieve from the impending destruction. Ultimately, the city's fate is sealed when Yahweh rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire, coming from Yahweh from the skies, and he upheavaled those cities and the whole plain and all the inhabitants thereof, and all that which grew upon the ground. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before Yahweh, and gazed in the direction of Sodom and Gomorrah, toward the land of the plain, and he beheld vapor arising from the earth as the smoke of a furnace. Genesis chapter 19. The Mesopotamian annals extensively document the same event as the climax of Marduk's quest for supremacy on earth. While living in exile, Marduk entrusted his son Nabu with the task of converting the people of Western Asia into followers of Marduk. Following a series of conflicts, Nabu's forces grew strong enough to invade Mesopotamia, allowing Marduk to return to Babylon. There, he announced his plan to transform it into the gateway of the gods, as its name Babili suggested. Concerned, the Council of the Anunnaki held urgent meetings led by Enlil. Ninurta, along with Nergal, a disenchanted son of Enki from the southern African region, proposed drastic measures to thwart Marduk. Enki strongly opposed this. Ishtar warned that while they deliberated, Marduk was capturing city after city. Sheriffs were dispatched to apprehend Nabu, but he managed to evade them and sought refuge among his supporters in one of the sinning cities. Eventually, Ninurta and Nergal were granted permission to recover hidden nuclear weapons and use them to obliterate the spaceport in the Sinai and the area where Nabu was hiding. Just as the divine actors in the Deluge tale were clearly identified, a similar comparison can be made in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. When examining the Biblical and Sumerian texts, it becomes evident that Yahweh does not align with Ninurta, but rather with Nergal, in the context of the upheaval of the sinful cities. The Mesopotamian text specifically attributes the destruction to Nergal, not Ninurta. Therefore, based on the Bible's account of Yahweh directly causing the destruction, it is clear that Yahweh cannot be associated with Ninurta. But Nergal was also not Yahweh, as he was specifically identified as the deity of the Cuthians, who were brought over by the Assyrians to replace the exiled Israelites. He was listed among the other gods worshipped by the newcomers, and therefore could not have been Yahweh and Yahweh's abomination at the same time. Nanar's primary religious site in Sumer was located in Ur, the city where Terah and his family initiated their migration. After conducting priestly duties in Ur, Terah's family journeyed to Haran along the upper Euphrates, a city that mirrored Ur as a religious center dedicated to Nanar, albeit on a smaller scale. This migration coincided with religious and royal transformations that likely impacted the worship of Nanar. Could it be that Nanar was the deity who directed Abram, a Sumerian, to depart from his homeland? He established peace and prosperity in Sumer during his reign in Ur, the capital city. In Ur's grand ziggurat, he was honored alongside his beloved wife Ningal, Great Lady. During the new moon, the people expressed their gratitude to this divine couple through hymns. The dark of the moon was seen as a time of the mystery of the great gods, a time of Nanar's oracle, where he would send Zakar, the god of dreams during the night, to issue commands and grant forgiveness for sins. Described in hymns as the decider of destinies in heaven and on earth, leader of living creatures, who ensures truth and justice prevail. The praises sung are reminiscent of those dedicated to Yahweh by the psalmist. The Akkadian Semitic name for Nanar was Sin, and it is evident that the part of the Sinai Peninsula known as the Wilderness of Sin in the Bible, as well as the entire peninsula, were named in honor of Nanar as Sin. This region is where Yahweh first appeared to Moses, where the Mount of the Gods was situated, and where the most significant theophany occurred. Additionally, the main settlement in the central plain of Sinai, near what is believed to be the true Mount Sinai, is still referred to as Nakal in Arabic after the goddess Ningal, whose Semitic name was Nikal. Several decades ago, extensive Canaanite literature was discovered, revealing that the god they called Baal was not entirely independent of his father El. In these texts, El is depicted as a retired god, living with his spouse Asherah at a quiet place where the two waters meet, identified as the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. Various factors, including this information, have led to the determination that the Canaanite El was actually the retired Nanar. One of the reasons for this conclusion is the presence of a cult center dedicated to Nanar at a crucial intersection in the ancient Near East. Even today, the city of Jericho, also known as Jericho in biblical Semitic terms, continues to exist as a significant location. Additionally, tribes to the south have embraced Allah, known as El in Arabic, as the god of Islam symbolized by the crescent moon. The Canaanite texts depict El as Nanar, a deity who had retired. Sumerian texts, on the other hand, reveal that Nanar was affected by the nuclear cloud and partially paralyzed when it reached Sumer and Ur. This portrayal of Nanar does not align with the active and powerful image of Yahweh in the Bible during the Exodus and the settlement of Canaan. Yahweh is depicted as a commanding and persistent deity, unlike the retired and afflicted Nanar. His veneration and fear were both linked to his connection with his celestial counterpart, the moon. This celestial association provides strong evidence against equating him with Yahweh. According to the biblical divine order, it was Yahweh who commanded the sun and the moon to be luminaries. The psalmist, chapter 148, verse 3, proclaimed, "The sun and the moon praise Yahweh." Additionally, the matter of Baal, the Canaanite deity, was a constant challenge for Yahweh's faithful. The recently discovered texts indicate that Baal was the son of El. His residence in the mountains of Lebanon is now known as Baalbek, the Valley of Baal, the initial stop for Gilgamesh in his quest for immortality. In the Bible, it was referred to as Beit Shemesh, the house of Shamash, and Shamash was a son of Nanar. Canaanite myths extensively discuss the interactions between Baal and his sister Anat. The Bible mentions a place called Beit Anat in the vicinity of Beit Shemesh, and it is likely that the Semitic name Anat was derived from Anunitu, Ami's beloved, a term for Inanna, the twin sister of Utu. It is evident that the Canaanite trio El Baal Anat mirrors the Mesopotamian triad of Nanar, Utu, and Inanna, representing the deities linked to the moon, the sun, and Venus. None of these figures could have been Yahweh, as the Bible consistently warns against the veneration of these celestial entities and their symbols. The instructions provided to Moses while at Mount Sinai were largely related to medical practices. Leviticus contains 5 entire chapters, and Numbers includes numerous passages dedicated to medical procedures, diagnosis, and treatment. Jeremiah, chapter 17, verse 14, pleaded, "Heal me, O Yahweh, and I shall be healed," while the psalmist, chapter 103, verses 1 through 3, praised Yahweh as the one who heals all ailments. King Hezekiah, due to his piety, not only recovered from a fatal illness at Yahweh's command, but was also granted an additional 15 years of life. 2 Kings chapter 19. Yahweh had the power to heal, extend life, and even revive the dead through his angels and prophets. Ezekiel's vision of the scattered dry bones coming back to life serves as an extreme example of Yahweh's ability to resurrect the dead. Enki possessed the biological medical knowledge that underlies these capabilities, and he imparted this knowledge to two of his sons, Marduk, also known as Ra in Egypt, and Thoth, referred to as Tahuti by the Egyptians and Ningish-Zida, Lord of the Tree of Life, by the Sumerians. Many Babylonian texts mention Marduk's healing abilities, yet he himself lamented to his father that he was only granted knowledge of healing, not that of resurrecting the dead. In contrast, Thoth possessed the ability to revive the deceased, as demonstrated when he brought Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis, back to life after being bitten by a poisonous scorpion. Thoth was called upon by Isis, who referred to him as the god of magical things, and he descended from the heavens in a sky boat to restore Horus to life, as described in hieroglyphic texts recounting the event. Yahweh demonstrated remarkable expertise in architecture, sacred alignments, decorative details, material usage, and construction methods during the construction of the tabernacle in the Sinai wilderness and later the temple in Jerusalem. He even went as far as presenting scale models to the individuals involved to showcase his designs. Marduk did not receive recognition for possessing such comprehensive knowledge, unlike Thoth. In Egypt, he was revered as the guardian of pyramid construction secrets, and as Ningish-Zida, he was summoned to Lagash to assist in the orientation, design, and material selection for the temple dedicated to Ninurta. A significant similarity between Yahweh and Thoth lies in their involvement with calendars. Thoth was credited with creating the first Egyptian calendar, and after being expelled from Egypt, he is believed to have devised the Aztec and Mayan calendars in Mesoamerica. On the other hand, Yahweh, as depicted in the biblical books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, not only changed the new year to the 7th month, but also introduced the concept of the week, the Sabbath, and various holidays. The shared roles of healer, reviver of the dead, divine architect, astronomer, and calendar designer make the parallels between Thoth and Yahweh quite striking. Although recognized in Sumer, he was not revered as one of the great gods, and therefore did not truly embody the title, the God Most High, that both Abraham and Melchizedek, priest of Jerusalem, used when they met. Primarily, he was a deity of Egypt, and he was one of those upon whom Yahweh intended to pass judgment. Celebrated in ancient Egypt, no pharaoh could be unaware of this god. However, when Moses and Aaron appeared before Pharaoh and declared, "Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, let my people go that they may worship me in the desert," Pharaoh responded, "Who is this Yahweh that I should obey his words? I do not know Yahweh, and I will not let the Israelites go." If Thoth were Yahweh, not only would the Pharaoh respond differently, but the mission of Moses and Aaron would have been simplified and achievable if they were to simply state, Yahweh is merely an alternate title for Thoth. Moses, having grown up in the Egyptian palace, would have easily recognized this truth if it were the case. The cuneiform sign for Anu, An in Sumerian, was a star, signifying God, divine, heaven, and the god's personal name. Anu, according to Mesopotamian texts, resided in heaven, and various biblical verses also referred to Yahweh as the one who is in heaven. Abraham declared, "I am a Hebrew, and it is Yahweh, the God of heaven, that I venerate." Genesis chapter 24, verse 7. Similarly, the prophet Jonah stated, "Yahweh, the God of heaven, commanded me to build for him a house in Jerusalem in Judea." Ezra chapter 1, verse 2. When Solomon finished building the temple in Jerusalem, he prayed to Yahweh to bless the temple as his house, acknowledging that Yahweh Elohim would not come to dwell on earth, as the heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain thee. 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27. The Psalms also emphasized Yahweh's presence in heaven, stating, "From the heaven did Yahweh look down upon the children of Adam." Chapter 14, verse 2. "From heaven did Yahweh behold the earth." Chapter 102, verse 20. And, "In heaven did Yahweh establish his throne." Chapter 103, verse 19. Anu made several visits to earth, but he resided on Nibiru. As a god whose home was in heaven, he remained unseen, with no depictions of him appearing on cylinder seals, statues, carvings, or other forms of art. Similarly, Yahweh, also unseen and unrepresented pictorially, resided in heaven. This leads to the question of where Yahweh's abode was. With the many parallels between Yahweh and Anu, it raises the question of whether Yahweh too had a Nibiru to dwell on. Although there are no specific texts that directly describe Anu's abode on Nibiru, some insight can be gathered indirectly from sources such as the Adapa tale, occasional references in various texts, and Assyrian depictions. Anu's abode can be envisioned as a grand royal palace, accessed through impressive gates with towering structures on either side. In some instances, it is mentioned that gods like Ningish-Zida and Dumuzi stood guard at the gates. Inside, Anu sat on a throne, with Enlil and Enki by his side holding celestial symbols when they were on Nibiru, or when Anu visited Earth. In the Bible, Yahweh was depicted as seated on a throne, surrounded by angels. Ezekiel described seeing the Lord's image, shining like electrum, seated on a throne inside a flying vehicle. The throne of Yahweh is in heaven, the Psalms, chapter 11, verse 4, proclaimed. And the prophets described seeing Yahweh seated on a throne in the heavens. Biblical references to Yahweh's throne went further. They actually specified its location, in a place called Olam. "Thy throne is established forever. From Olam art thou," the Psalms, chapter 93, verse 2, declared. "Thou, Yahweh, are enthroned in Olam, enduring through the ages." Book of Lamentations, chapter 5, verse 19. The verses, including the quoted verse from Psalms and the verse in Lamentations, have traditionally been translated differently. For instance, the King James Version translates the Psalms verse as, "Thy throne is established of old, thou art from everlasting," and the Lamentations verse as, "Thou, O Lord, remainest forever, thy throne from generation to generation." Modern translations also use words like everlasting, forever, eternity, and forever to translate Olam, showing uncertainty in treating the term as an adjective or a noun. However, the most recent translation by the Jewish Publication Society has chosen to use eternity as a solution, recognizing Olam as a noun. Quote, "It was a place that was conceived as physically existing." Deuteronomy, chapter 33, verse 15, and the prophet Habakkuk, chapter 3, verse 6, spoke of the hills of Olam. Isaiah, chapter 33, verse 14, referred to the heat sources of Olam. Jeremiah, chapter 6:16, mentioned the pathways of Olam, and chapter 18, verse 5, the lanes of Olam, and called Yahweh King of Olam, chapter 10, verse 10, as did Psalms chapter 10, verse 16. The Psalms, in statements reminiscent of the references to the gates of Anu's abode in Sumerian texts, and to the gates of heaven in ancient Egyptian texts, also spoke of the gates of Olam that should open and welcome the Lord Yahweh as he arrives there upon his kabod, his celestial boat, chapter 24, verses 7 through 10. Lift up your heads, O gates of Olam, so that the king of Kabod may come in. Who is the king of Kabod? Yahweh, strong and valiant, a mighty warrior. Lift up your heads, O gates of Olam, and the king of Kabod shall come in. Who is the king of Kabod? Yahweh, Lord of hosts, is the king of Kabod. Yahweh is the God of Olam, declared Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 28, echoing the biblical record in Genesis, chapter 21, verse 33, of Abraham's calling in the name of Yahweh, the God of Olam. No wonder, then, that the covenant symbolized by circumcision, the celestial sign, was called by the Lord, when he had imposed it on Abraham and his descendants, the covenant of Olam. And my covenant shall be in your flesh, the covenant of Olam. Genesis chapter 17, verse 13. End quote. The prophets also frequently referred to the years of Olam as a representation of an extensive period. The concept of periodicity, akin to the cyclical appearance and disappearance of a celestial body, was emphasized through the repeated use of from Olam to Olam as a specific, albeit exceedingly lengthy, time frame. I had given you this land from Olam to Olam, as cited by Jeremiah, chapter 7, verse 7, and chapter 25, verse 5. Furthermore, a potential link between Olam and Nibiru was suggested in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, where the Nephilim, the youthful Anunnaki from Nibiru, were described as the people of the Shem, the people of the rocket ships, those who were from Olam. Given the clear influence of Mesopotamian myths and astronomy on the Bible's editors, prophets, and psalmists, it would have been unusual for the Bible not to contain references to the significant planet Nibiru. In fact, the Bible demonstrated a keen awareness of Nibiru, referring to it as Olam, the disappearing planet. Does all that mean that therefore Anu was Yahweh? Not necessarily. The Bible portrays Yahweh as reigning in his celestial abode, similar to Anu, but also as king over the earth and all upon it, while Anu gave the command on earth to Enlil. Anu's visits to earth are described as ceremonial state and inspection visits in extant texts, lacking the active involvement of Yahweh in the affairs of nations and individuals. Additionally, the Bible acknowledges a God other than Yahweh, a God of other nations called An, whose worship is noted in the listing of gods of the foreigners whom the Assyrians had resettled in Samaria. An is referred to as An-Melech, Anu the king. The Bible also mentions a personal name, Anani, honoring Anu, and a place called Anatot. Unlike Anu, the Bible does not provide a genealogy for Yahweh, details of his lifestyle or his relationships, such as his fondness for his granddaughter Inanna, whose worship as the Queen of Heaven Venus was considered an abomination in the eyes of Yahweh. Quote, "And so, in spite of the similarities, there are also too many essential differences between Anu and Yahweh, for the two to have been one and the same. Moreover, in the biblical view, Yahweh was more than King Lord of Olam, as Anu was king on Nibiru. He was more than once hailed as El Olam, the God of Olam, Genesis chapter 21, verse 33, and El Elohim, the God of the Elohim, Joshua chapter 22, verse 22, Psalms chapter 50, verse 1, and Psalms chapter 136, verse 2. End quote. It may seem unbelievable at first that the Elohim, or gods, the Anunnaki, had a god, but upon reflection, it appears quite logical. The Anunnaki, who were technologically advanced and capable of space travel hundreds of thousands of years before us, likely arrived at a cosmological explanation for the creation of the solar system, and contemplated and understood the universe, just as we are beginning to do. They must have pondered their origins and arrived at what we now call religion, their religion and their concept of God. According to the Bible, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, were created by Yahweh on their planet. The Bible states that Yahweh was not only a great God, a great king over all of the Elohim, Psalms chapter 95, verse 3, but he was also present on Nibiru before the Anunnaki came into existence. Psalm chapter 61, verse 8, explains that Yahweh sat before the Elohim upon Olam. Just as the Anunnaki were on earth before the Adam, Yahweh was on Nibiru, also known as Olam, before the Anunnaki. The Creator came before the created. The apparent immortality of the Anunnaki gods was simply a result of their extreme longevity, as one Nibiru year equaled 3,600 Earth years. It is important to note that they were indeed mortal, being born, aging, and eventually dying. The prophets and psalmist recognized a time measure applicable to Olam, days of Olam, and years of Olam. What is even more remarkable is their understanding that the various Elohim, the Sumerian Dingir, and the Akkadian Elu, were not immortal, unlike Yahweh. Therefore, Psalm chapter 82 depicts God passing judgment on the Elohim and reminding them of their mortality. God stands in the divine assembly among the Elohim he judges, and tells them thus, I have said, Ye are Elohim, all of you sons of the Most High, but ye shall die as men do, like any prince ye shall fall. The convergence of science and religion, physics and metaphysics, culminates in a singular answer that aligns with the Jewish monotheistic belief. I am Yahweh. There is none beside me. This belief has been upheld by the prophets, guiding us from the realm of multiple gods to the one God who encompasses the entire universe. These statements are crucial in identifying the biblical God, as they reveal the answer that he gave to Moses when asked about his identity. When called out of the burning bush, he identified himself as the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses, upon receiving his mission, expressed concern about how to answer the question of the children of Israel regarding God's name. And God said to Moses, Ehyeh Asher, Ehyeh, this is what thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, Ehyeh sent me. And God said further to Moses, Thus shalt say unto the children of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me unto you. This is my name unto Olam. This is my appellation unto all generations. Exodus chapter 3, verses 13 through 15. The phrase Ehyeh, Asher Ehyeh, has sparked debates, scrutiny, and explanation from theologians, biblical experts, and language specialists across different eras. The King James Version renders it as, I am that I am. I am hath sent me to you. More contemporary translations opt for, I am, that is who I am. I am has sent you. The latest translation by the Jewish Publication Society chooses to retain the original Hebrew, with a footnote stating, meaning of the Hebrew uncertain. The grammatical tenses used in the answer are crucial for understanding it. Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh is not presented in the present tense, but rather in the future tense. In simpler terms, it conveys the message, "Whoever I shall be, I shall be." The divine name revealed to Moses for the first time in the conversation, Moses is informed that the sacred name, the Tetragrammaton YHWH, had not even been revealed to Abraham, encompasses the three tenses derived from the root meaning to be, the one who was, who is, and who shall be. This response and name are fitting for the biblical concept of Yahweh as eternally existing, one who was, who is, and who will continue to be. One common way to describe the eternal nature of the biblical God is by using the phrase, "Thou art from olam to olam." While it is commonly translated as, "Thou art everlasting," this translation captures the essence of the statement, but not its exact meaning. When taken literally, it implies that Yahweh's existence and rule span from one olam to another, indicating that he is not just the ruler of one olam, like the Mesopotamian Nibiru, but of multiple olams, or worlds. The Bible mentions Yahweh's abode, domain, and kingdom as olamim at least 11 times. Olamim is the plural of olam, representing a domain, an abode, a kingdom that includes multiple worlds. This concept expands Yahweh's lordship from being a national God to a judge of all nations, extending beyond earth and Nibiru to the heavens of heaven. Deuteronomy chapter 10 verse 14, 1 Kings chapter 8 verse 27, 2 Chronicles chapter 2 verse 5, and chapter 6 verse 18. These heavens encompass not only the solar system, but also the distant stars. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 19, Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verse 2. As we look at everything, the divine planetary deities, Nibiru, which reconstructed our solar system and transforms the earth during its close encounters, the Anunnaki Elohim, humanity, countries, rulers. All of it represents him and his tools, executing a divine and timeless universal scheme. In a sense, we all act as his messengers, and when the moment arrives for humans to journey through space and imitate the Anunnaki on another planet, we will also simply be fulfilling a predetermined destiny.